Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And this time, we are going to be looking at the fascinating connection between talent genetics and success.
It's such an interesting topic, I
Yeah.
think, that so many people are kind of fascinated with the question, like, are we born with a predetermined path to greatness, you know?
Yeah.
Or is it all about just like putting in the work, the sweat, you know?
Right. And I know that we have some research here that kind of supports both sides of that.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is going to be really interesting to kind of dig in, I think.
Yeah, and what's I think one of the most captivating aspects of this whole topic is kind of the concept of finding your right game.
Yeah.
You know, like that sweet spot where your natural abilities give you a real advantage, you know? And
That makes you think of like Michael Phelps,
yeah.
like built for the pool.
Yeah, but could you imagine him trying to like run a marathon, you know?
Right.
Maybe not his forte.
Not so much.
Yeah.
Not his game.
Yeah.
So it really makes you wonder, how much does our biology really influence, our success, and how do we even figure out where we fit in?
Right. And speaking of Michael Phelps, one of our sources actually uses him and another Olympic champion, Hicham El Guerrouj, as a comparison.
Okay.
And it's pretty illuminating.
Yeah.
So you've got Phelps, 6'4" long torso, shorter legs, practically made for swimming.
Right.
Then you got El Guerrouj, who's 9 long legs, perfect build for a distance runner.
Right.
And they're both at the top of their game, right?
Yeah.
But could you imagine them trying to switch sports?
Right.
I mean, it really highlights how much of a head start our physical traits can give us in certain areas.
So it's like everyone has their own lane, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
But how does this apply to those of us who aren't, Olympic athletes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it applies to everyone because it's really about, recognizing that your genes, they laid a foundation, right?
Okay.
But our habits are the tools we use to build on that foundation. And so the key is choosing the right field of competition, one that aligns with your natural inclinations and abilities.
So how do we even figure that out?
Right.
Like, are we supposed to just try everything until something clicks?
Well, I mean, there are definitely some clues we can look for.
Okay.
Our sources talk about something called the Big Five personality traits.
Okay.
And how understanding these traits can give us some insight into, what we might naturally gravitate towards.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. What are these big five traits and how can they help us?
Yeah, so the Big Five are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Okay.
And they basically describe these like broad dimensions of personality.
Okay.
So for example, someone high in conscientiousness is going to be organized, disciplined, really goal-oriented.
Right.
They might naturally excel in fields that require a lot of structure and planning, like
Yeah.
project management or scientific research.
Okay.
On the other hand, someone who's high in extroversion, they thrive on social interaction energy,
Right. So they might find their right game in a field like sales or entertainment.
This is not just about our physical attributes, but also how we're wired personality-wise.
Right.
It's like our personality is like a compass kind of pointing us in a direction.
Exactly. And this is where things get even more interesting, because one of the sources talks about how Google encourages its employees to spend 20% of their time on side projects.
Mm.
And this kind of experimentation can help people discover hidden talents and passions they may not have even realized they had.
That's so cool. It's like, you're giving people the space and the permission to kind of explore and see what they're good at, what they enjoy.
Exactly. And sometimes you stumble upon something that you never would have thought of otherwise.
That's a really good point. And that's kind of how I got into podcasting. It's just something that I kind of tried out and
Yeah.
didn't think I would be good at it. But the more I experimented with it, the more I realized, like, actually, this is kind of fun.
Yeah.
This is something I enjoy. And that's a perfect illustration of how stepping outside your comfort zone can lead to some pretty amazing discovery.
Yeah.
So, for you listening, think about, what activities you're naturally drawn to.
Yeah.
What do you lose yourself in? Where does time seem to fly by?
Yeah.
Those are clues pointing you toward your right game.
This is making me want to write a list. Like, what have I always wanted to try and haven't yet?
Yeah, totally.
But what about the whole hard work element? Does this mean that we can just skip putting in the effort?
That's a common misconception and one that our sources address directly. Genes
Hmm.
don't give you a free pass to skip the hard work.
Right.
They simply highlight what to work hard on.
Okay.
Even with natural talent, consistent effort is essential for reaching your full potential.
So it's not a get out of jail free card,
Yeah.
but it's more like a roadmap
Right,
to where
exactly.
your efforts will have the most impact.
Think of it like this. Even someone with the natural talent of Mozart still had to practice to become a virtuoso. Natural ability can give you a head start, but it's the dedication and hard work that transforms potential into true mastery.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Right.
Even Michael Phelps, with his ideal physique for swimming, still had to train like crazy to get to that level.
Absolutely.
So it's like talent sets the stage, but hard work steals the show.
I like that. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
All right, so we've talked about, how our genes and our personalities kind of give us these clues to what we might be good at.
Right.
But how do we actually identify our right game? Like, what are some practical steps we can take to figure that out?
That's a great question, and that's actually what we're going to be diving into next.
Perfect.
But before we do that, I want to leave you with this question. What activities make you feel truly energized?
Yeah.
What are you naturally good at, even if you haven't fully explored it yet?
Mm,
So take some time to ponder that, and we'll be back in just a moment to explore some practical strategies for finding the right game for you.
awesome.
Oh.
I'm excited to dig into that. I know I'm already thinking about my answers to those questions, so we'll be right back.
So before we moved on, we asked you to think about, those activities that make you feel energized, the things you're naturally good at.
Yeah.
And that's a great starting point for this whole idea of finding your right game.
Right. It's like that thing you could do for hours and not even realize that time is flying by.
Yeah, exactly.
But, our sources go beyond just like, follow your bliss.
Right?
There's a strategic element to it as well.
Yeah,
It's about finding a path where your talents actually give you an edge.
exactly. And one source uses this great analogy. They say it's like the early stages of a gold rush.
Yeah.
You have to sift through a lot of dirt and gravel to find those nuggets of gold.
I like that.
Yeah.
So how do we pan for gold in our own lives? Like, what are some practical tips?
Well, think back to when you were a kid, right? You
Mhm.
probably tried all sorts of things, sports, music, art, building crazy contraptions in the backyard.
Right.
And that's the kind of spirit we want to capture, It's
Yeah.
all about approaching it with a sense of curiosity and experimentation.
So it's okay to not have it all figured out right away.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we can give ourselves permission to try different things and see what sparks our interest.
Yeah, 100%. And this doesn't just apply to childhood. This process of exploration should continue throughout our lives.
Right.
Our interests and abilities evolve, the world changes, new opportunities pop up.
Right.
So it's about staying open to new possibilities and being willing to step outside our comfort zones.
That makes me think of those online quizzes that tell you what career you should have based on your personality.
Oh, yeah.
But, those can be a little bit hit or miss.
Yeah.
So how do we really know, like when we struck gold?
Well, our sources mention a few key indicators. One is that feeling of flow,
Okay,
that
yeah.
state of deep immersion where you become so engrossed in what you're doing that time just seems to disappear. Another is a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment, even when the task is challenging.
It's like those times when you look up and it's like 3 hours later and you're like, whoa, where did the time go? But
Exactly.
I was having so much fun I didn't even realize.
And that's a great sign you're on the right track.
Yeah.
But it's not just about relying on our feelings. We also need to seek feedback from others, to get a more objective perspective on our strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, that's a good point because sometimes we can be our own worst critic.
Right. Or we overestimate our abilities in certain areas, So
Right.
getting feedback from people we trust can help us see things more clearly.
That's a really good point.
And here's something else to consider. Pay attention to the things that other people find difficult,
Okay.
but that come easily to you.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So instead of like beating ourselves up about the things that we're not good at, we should be looking for those areas where we have a natural advantage.
Precisely. Those are often clues to your hidden talents and potential,
Yeah.
It's like discovering a superpower you didn't even know you had.
I love that reframing.
Yeah.
It's about, focusing on what we're good at and using those strengths to our advantage.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious, at what point do we go from exploring to actually like specializing?
That's a great question. And our sources suggest that while exploration is crucial early on, Eventually we need to focus our efforts if we want to achieve true mastery.
Right. So there's like the difference between being a jack of all trades and a master of one.
Exactly. You can dabble in a lot of things, but to really excel, you need to choose a specific path and really hone your skills.
Right.
And that's where this idea of deliberate practice comes in.
Okay.
It's not just about putting in the hours, it's about focusing on specific areas where you want to improve and pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone.
This makes me think of that 10,000-hour rule.
Yes.
The idea that it takes roughly that long to become like world class at something.
Right. And that highlights the importance of patience and persistence. Mastery takes time
Yeah.
and consistent effort, but it's not just about willpower, it's also about finding an area where you're willing to put in that kind of dedication.
Right. Because if you don't enjoy it, 10,000 hours is going to feel like a really, really long time.
Exactly. Yeah, you're not going to make it.
This is making me think that genetics might play a role here too. Like
Mhm.
maybe some people are just wired to like enjoy hard work and have that grit, you know?
That's a fascinating idea and one that some researchers are exploring. It's not a guarantee, of course,
Yeah.
but it could certainly influence our inclinations and how easily we find the motivation to push through challenges.
So it's like a combination of nature and nurture,
Right.
Our genes might give us a predisposition towards certain fields, but it's our choices and actions that ultimately determine our success.
Absolutely. And this leads us to a really important point. Even if you found your right game and have a natural talent for it,
Yeah.
the role of hard work is never negated.
Right. You still need to put in the effort to develop and refine your skills.
That makes sense. I'm thinking back to Michael Phelps again. With his perfect physique, he still had to train relentlessly to become an Olympic champion.
Exactly.
So, genes might have given him a head start,
Right.
but it was his dedication and work ethic that really propelled him to that level of greatness.
It's the combination of natural talent and deliberate practice that creates true excellence.
Yeah, this is such an inspiring message.
Mm.
It means that even if we aren't born with, the perfect set of genes for something, we can still achieve incredible things through hard work and determination.
And that's the beauty of it all. It's about finding that sweet spot where your passions, your talents, and your hard work come together
Yeah.
to create something truly extraordinary.
This has been so insightful. It's really made me think about how I can, leverage my strengths and make choices that really align with my potential. But we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Where do we go from here? Well, in the final part of our deep dive, we'll discuss some practical strategies for cultivating habits that support your goals.
Okay.
And creating an environment that fosters success.
Perfect.
So stay tuned for that.
Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into talent genetics and success. And we've talked about finding the right game where your natural abilities can really shine.
All right.
But how do we take all this information and actually put it into practice? Like, what do we do?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And our sources really emphasize that, identifying your right game is just the first step.
Okay.
The real work begins when you start building habits that support your success in that chosen field.
So it's not enough to just like know where we fit in.
Yeah.
We have to actually, cultivate the skills and the routines that will help us thrive.
Exactly, and that's where the idea of habit design comes in.
Okay.
Our sources suggest that the most effective habits are the ones that work with your personality and your natural inclinations, not against them.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where discipline feels less like a chore and more like a natural extension of who you are.
Right, and I think one of the biggest pitfalls is trying to force ourselves into habits that just don't resonate with who we are.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
It's just not going to work in the long run, and you're going to end up feeling frustrated and discouraged.
So we need to find habits that feel natural and enjoyable, something that we can actually stick with over time.
Exactly.
No more torturing ourselves with routines that we dread.
Right. And remember those activities we talked about earlier, the ones that make you feel energized and engaged?
Yeah.
That's the feeling we want to tap into when we're designing new habits. It should feel more like playing a game you enjoy than forcing yourself to eat your vegetables.
Right. It shouldn't feel like punishment. So it's like if you're someone who thrives on brainstorming and, coming up with new ideas, maybe your ideal habit involves setting aside time each day for creative thinking and exploration.
Right.
But if you love structure and organization, maybe it's creating detailed to-do lists and schedules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about tailoring your habits to your unique personality and preferences.
Yeah.
The more those habits feel like an extension of who you are, the more likely you are to stick with them and reap the rewards.
This is so empowering. It's like we have the power to design our own success by creating a system that works with us.
Right.
But what about those areas where we might not have a natural advantage? You know, what if we find ourselves, playing a game that requires skills that don't come easily to us?
Right.
What do we do then?
That's a great question. And our sources acknowledge that we can't always be in the driver's seat. Sometimes we have to adapt and develop skills that might not come naturally.
Right.
But even in those situations, the principle of aligning effort with strengths still
Yeah.
applies. It's about getting creative and resourceful.
So it's like, if we're not naturally gifted in something, we can still find ways to leverage our existing strengths
Exactly.
to approach that challenge.
Think of it like this. Let's say you're not a natural public speaker,
Okay.
but your job requires you to give presentations.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to force yourself to become this charismatic orator, maybe you can leverage your analytical strengths to create presentations that are data-driven and visually compelling.
Oh, that's a good example
Yeah.
of thinking outside the box and finding ways to play to our strengths,
Exactly.
even in those tough situations.
And this brings us to this concept of creating your own game.
Okay.
Our sources argue that sometimes the most successful people are those who don't just play the existing games,
Right.
but they create entirely new ones that play to their unique strengths.
So they're not just following the rules, they're making their own rules.
Exactly. They're redefining the rules. They're breaking the mold.
I love that.
And they're creating a space where their talents can truly shine.
And that brings us back to the core message of this whole deep dive.
Yeah,
You can't control the cards you're dealt, but you can choose how you play them.
exactly.
It's about understanding your strengths, cultivating habits that support your goals, and being willing to adapt, create, and redefine the game as you go along.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been such an inspiring and insightful conversation. It's really given me a new perspective on this whole idea of talent and success.
I'm glad to hear that.
I feel like I have a better understanding of how to leverage my own strengths and make choices that really align with my potential. And I'm walking away feeling energized and ready to take on new challenges.
That's fantastic. And remember, this journey of self-discovery and growth is an ongoing process.
Right.
So keep exploring, experimenting, and refining your approach as you continue to navigate the game of life.
So much good advice.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. This has been amazing.
My pleasure.
And to all of you listening, we encourage you to take these insights and apply them to your own lives. What games are you currently playing? Are they the right ones for you? And if not, what steps can you take today to start aligning your efforts with your natural strengths and passions? Remember, success is not a destination. It's a journey of self-discovery, growth, and fulfillment. Until next time, keep diving deep.